structural inequality and violent border systems to survive. And this is the legacies of colonialism which we fight together. And looking at sort of climate-linked migration, which is the term often used, people leaving their homes due to floods, whether it's the flood in the Philippines or anything else, as sort of you alluded to, is quite a challenging and debated concept. As John just stated, climate refugee does not have any formal status in international law, and focusing on this category alone can sort of hide the complexity of human mobility and also potentially be used to undermine people who move inside of their countries and between them in any number of ways for a number of reasons. So sort of the intersection of climate and migration and migrant justice is much deeper than just climate-related migration. And I won't go through all of the notes here because I'll be speaking all day, but as more people move due to climate breakdown, governments in the global north are increasingly using border controls, walls and surveillance, or the hostile environment as we call it here, to control the impacts of the climate crisis. They spend billions propping up the border and surveillance industry, money that could be spent on loss and damage payments, reparations to protect communities that are most affected by climate breakdown and global inequality. And the trend is only increasing. The world's biggest emitters of greenhouse gases are spending on average 2.3 times more on arming their borders, militarization and securitization than they are on climate finance. Investment banks like BlackRock and Vanguard, they're making billions funding fossil fuel projects that wreck our planet, whilst at the same time they invest in the border and surveillance industry that depends on climate breakdown and racist government policy for its profit. So that is, again, it shows a clear intersection between these movements for justice, and why I feel like the fights have to be together. Those fights for climate justice, for migrant justice, and really across all our fights for justice, whether it's workers' justice, racial justice, we're all fighting the same systems of exploitation, oppression, legacies of colonialism and racialized capitalism. I'll save the rest of my notes maybe for the wider discussion because I don't want to go into too much, and let's let Zita speak because I'll go on for too long, but that's just a very brief introduction. Thank you.
Thanks, Tyrone, and as you say, there's such a lot to say. You could have carried on for quite a long time, but let's have that discussion and bring you back in. Now finally, in terms of speaker, I'm so thrilled, Zita, that you were able to come. Zita Holbourne is, again, she won't mind me saying, one of my old colleagues at PCS. It's been great to see the PCS people at every one of the workshops so far. She's an author, writer, poet, artist, curator and vocalist, which I'm really excited about.
I'm not going to sing though.
But she's the Joint National Chair of Artists Union England and also co-founder, National Chair of BARAC UK, that's Black Activists Rising Against the Cuts. I can't even begin to measure what fantastic contribution Zita has made on issues of race and migration and equality and just social justice generally. So Zita, please.
Thank you. Oh, thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm feeling the love here. I'm probably going to repeat a bit of what my colleagues have said because it's all interlinked. I'm really pleased to be here and thank you for inviting me. It's really important that we do have a discussion about this issue and that the issue of race and migration is front and centre of any discussion and activities and actions we're taking on climate. And people fleeing countries in the global south are usually fleeing a combination of climate change, persecution, conflict and poverty. Whether it's all of those or a combination of them, the reality is you can't separate one from another. So when the UK tries to talk about economic migrants, it's a nonsense anyway. And actually the issue is far more complex than being able to just label and say this person is that type of migrant, that person is that type of asylum seeker. Most people who are displaced are actually displaced in their own country to begin with. They don't, if it's a really urgent situation, yes, you might have to flee the country immediately. But usually people find themselves displaced within their country. And actually, it's those issues of instability, poverty, illegal occupations, conflict, the legacies of colonialism, that create an environment whereby when they try to flee within their own country, actually there isn't the stability for them to survive and be able to continue their lives, and they have to get out and they have to cross borders because they've got no choice. Most people don't want to do that. You do it out of desperation, not out of an option and a choice. And the global north have very often, if not always, been the ones that have contributed, either historically or in current times, to that environment, with all of those factors that I've mentioned impacting on people. So when we're looking at just transition, we need to look at all of these factors. They need to be taken into account. But we also need to have a respect and understanding of indigenous cultures, relationships with the land, ancient traditions that have been passed down. You can't just strip people of their culture and say you need to contribute to addressing climate change, and you've got to do the same as the global north. It can't work like that because of the infrastructure and the economy is not there in most global south countries, but there are also all of these other factors in respect of traditions and relationship with the land, and things not being that straightforward as this land belongs to this person, that land belongs to that organisation there. The land is far more complex, and how the land is occupied between indigenous people, between travelling communities, between other creatures other than human beings, all of those things need to be taken into account. And the global south contribute least to climate change, and where they're contributing, they don't have the same options as the global north to change, because of poverty, because of instability, because of lack of resources. And then, as has already been mentioned by colleagues here, when they do flee, they're facing persecution, they're facing danger, they're being labelled, they're being subjected to racist policies and laws, but also being subjected to direct racism as they're trying to navigate their way to freedom and a safe start somewhere else. And BARAC UK, we've been working with refugees in northern France for over 10 years now. And we've heard many stories of those people that are stuck in limbo. You know, we've sat down and had conversations with people about their life stories and their journeys and why they are where they are, stuck in limbo in northern France, trying to get to the UK. And we're talking about mainly young men who are the ones taking those journeys, because if you're a pregnant woman, or you've got young children, or you've got a disability, or you're elderly, those journeys, they're perilous for anybody, whatever age or what level of fitness or mobility you've got. But if you've got those other factors to take into consideration, it's far more difficult. They've gone through trauma because the reason they've had to flee is traumatic. They've gone through the trauma of those journeys, and then those journeys usually have taken months. For some people, they've even taken years, because you've got to stop, you've got to recharge your batteries, you've got to try and work out how you're getting across the next border, you've got to find the basic necessities of food and shelter and water, and have some rest. So they're navigating dangerous terrains and seas, as we know. People are dying on those journeys, and there's nobody embarks on that kind of journey unless what they're fleeing is worse than what they're facing. And having to navigate borders to even get to the point that you're in northern France, people have risked their lives to even get to that stage. And their reason for coming to the UK, a lot of people here who are racist asking, why are they coming here? Yeah. What's their connection with the UK? Why don't they just stay in France then? If they've got to whatever country in Europe they've got to, why can't they just stay there? And the reason that they are coming here is because the UK was there. That's the connection, yeah? Through colonialism, through empire, through enslavement, the UK has gone, and illegal wars and occupations, the UK has gone into their lands. That has led to their families or their ancestors coming to the UK, and that's where they've got family connections and community connections. And whilst the UK is incredibly racist, actually when people look at the options across European countries, they will look at UK as being less racist. And Hector will tell you that when we're having conversations and people think, you know, it's paved with gold and they're going to have a wonderful time, we're having quite realistic conversations with these young people about the reality of what we're facing, about what our parents have faced as part of the Windrush generation, and what we're having to navigate in terms of a racist society. But actually, when they look at what they're facing where they are in limbo, what they've had to leave, this still looks like better prospects for them and better opportunities. And if you're in what you consider to be a safe environment because you've got a community and a family that connects you, then that gives you a better footing, doesn't it, when you've got to start again from scratch, that you've got people that look like you, that understand you, that are from your culture and are of your kin. It's going to be easier. That means that because you're talking about largely young people making those perilous journeys because they can make the journeys and they can survive them, when they try and bring their families over, they're facing huge hurdles, like the visa fees, like the threshold for what you've got to earn, and the government wants to put that up by another £10,000. Even, you know, people who are born in the UK and have been working their whole life in the UK are on minimum wage, or on, you know, a basic living wage, if that, are struggling to make ends meet, are having to do 2 or 3 jobs. And actually, people who are coming and new to the UK are more likely to be in precarious employment, are more likely to be on the worst pay and terms and conditions. The likelihood of them earning enough to meet that threshold to bring family members over. So you're talking about additional trauma, additional racism of keeping families separate. In the same way we've had the Windrush scandal tearing families apart, this is another form of tearing families apart. And even if you look at how Britain treats people who migrate to the UK, whatever reason they're migrating, and the labels that are put on them, and how they're deemed to be illegal immigrants. But the UK, British people have spread themselves across the world, haven't they, and resettled here, there and everywhere, and they use the term expats. They expect everybody to, you know, give them some jam on toast and egg and bacon wherever they go and speak English, and are arrogant enough to expect everybody else to adapt to their culture when they're the ones coming to a new country. Yet they've got this hypocritical face when it comes to people migrating to the UK. And in reality, the economy here would have collapsed 1,000,000 times over if it wasn't for migrant labour, not just over recent years, but over decades and even centuries. Britain depends on migrant labour to survive. The reason, you know, my parents' generation, Windrush generation, came is because of enslavement, is because of colonialism, is because they were invited to come here to help the country recover and help the economy and do jobs that other people didn't want to do in the face of the most horrific racism at the same time. So once you're here, if you even get here, you're having to navigate multiple layers of racism, racist immigration laws and policies, the Windrush scandal, we've had the small boats pushback, we've got the Rwanda deal, we've got detention centres that are akin to prisons in inhumane conditions, and then the threat hanging over you of being deported at any time. No recourse to public funds, demonised and labelled and accused. You're going through trauma and you can't get the support from the NHS to help you work your way through that trauma. You've got to navigate then medical support, benefit support, the immigration system, before you even get to a stage where you might be eligible to apply for a job and work in the UK. And then you may be also working underground in the even worse conditions than we know people who are working legally face in the most precarious conditions, just to be able to earn some kind of money. In the pandemic, BARAC redirected a lot of our funds that we give to refugees for food and basic necessities to people with no recourse to public funds. In my own area, in London, I found there were pregnant women and people having babies, families, because they had no recourse to public funds. They may have had a partner who was entitled to work, and then they were the first out the door in the pandemic because they're doing those frontline jobs, essential work, and so they've not been furloughed. They're out the door first, but even though they were entitled to work, they're not entitled to any support. And these were people giving birth to babies with nothing for them. Nothing, no cot, no carry cot, no nappies, no nothing, just basic things. And we had to campaign during the pandemic for those people with no recourse to public funds just to have something, but by the time it came, it was very late in the day, so they were depending on charity. And charity is not giving you any dignity. That's why when we're doing humanitarian aid work with refugees in France, we talk about solidarity, practical solidarity with refugees, because nobody wants handouts and charity. People want to come and have dignity and work and earn and contribute to the society and the economy they're in. And actually it would benefit Britain if those people were allowed to work, because they would do the hard graft and the labour that very often other people don't want to do. If you're deported, you may be facing death. People have taken their own lives, people that have their lives threatened. You don't know whether you're ever going to see your loved ones again. And very often people aren't being deported to the country that they were born in, that they originally set out from. They're deported to the country they entered Britain via. And it's not, so they're starting all over again. They're in limbo all over again and having to navigate that whole system all over again, whether it's to go back to an unsafe environment where they originally started their journeys, or to try again to come to Britain. We need to ensure that countries in the global south, if we're talking about addressing climate change and supporting everybody and working together, that they have the resources, the finance to manage transition. We have to look at the fact that they're also trying to navigate poverty, they're trying to navigate economic growth, as well as address the issues of climate change. And what does that mean for jobs, for people that have no other choices and no options because they've had to flee rural areas, for example, and they can't work the land and they can't live off the land. Many more people in the global south work informally, so they're working in unsafe environments. It's not trade unionised. So we have to factor that in when we're talking about what can we do as a trade union movement to bring solidarity to trade unions and workers in the global south, and what practical support and help can we give. So all of this needs to be considered, as well as the points I made earlier about the land and culture and indigenous traditions. So in fighting for climate justice, we also need to involve those who have lived experience of climate change. And that includes people who are, for example, like myself, second generation born here to a migrant parent, because seasonally our families back home are dealing with the impacts of climate change, whether it's hurricanes and tsunamis and so on, and flooding. We have to deal with those things every day. We have lived and first-hand experience of what extreme climate does to communities, does to your house, does to your family. And if we look at the climate movement here in Britain, it's very white. Yeah, I think if we all sit back into that main conference room, we'll see it's a very white space. It shouldn't be, because we're talking about also a trade union group. Trade unions have black structures, lots of black workers join trade unions, so there's a lot more work we can be doing to reach out and include and involve black workers, migrant workers, black and brown workers in this campaign and in the work we're doing on climate change. And it has to also go hand in hand with fighting racism, fighting xenophobia, fighting racist immigration policies and laws, fighting racism in the labour market, fighting racism in the workplace, fighting racist harassment and bullying at work. We can't do one without the other. They all have to go hand in hand. And we need to join up with the campaigns with black organisations, black and brown organisations, migrant rights organisations who are fighting for safe passage, who are fighting against detentions, against deportations, because again, they're all interconnected. And there should be nothing about us without us. So the people that are impacted need to have a seat at the table, need to be on the platforms, need to be at the front of the marches, and their voices need to be listened to as well. We need to fight racism in housing, racism in the workplace. We need to fight for better terms and conditions in our workplaces and in the labour market, because they might impact on many working class people, but disproportionately they're impacting on black and brown and migrant workers or potential workers. And we need to ensure that we decolonise not just our workplaces, not just our institutions, and hold our governments to account in terms of decolonisation and addressing the legacies of colonialism. We need to decolonise the climate movement as well. And I'll finish there.
Thanks very much, Zita, and thank you, John and Tyrone. Fantastic contributions. Really appreciate it. Can I just take a moment to make a kind of trivial request, I guess, but it's not so trivial really. But in the when we go back downstairs for the closing plenary at 4, it's only a half-hour session, so there really isn't much time for this. But each of the workshops, somebody from the workshop is going to give a short summary. When I say summary, I literally mean 1 minute each, because they're not of all the content, obviously, but just to kind of what you've kind of taken away from that session. So I'm going to ask potentially a futile question, because I'm already doing one and John is doing one. So